Coming up this morning, the number of walking wounded in the Saints camp continues to rise, and they include quite possibly two of the most important players on this roster. Dennis Allen's not losing sleep over it yet. That's the negative. The positive is there most certainly are bright spots and some names hardly anyone heard of before a week or so ago. Who are they? Is it just early camp talk, or is it for real? We'll ask first-time guest Ross Jackson of the Locked On Saints podcast. Gabe Henderson will also join us early for Wednesdays with Gabe, and we'll wrap up the show with a fun extra point. Let's go back in time on the extra point. Let's celebrate the 2000 trade for Aaron Brooks. Come on, you know you want to celebrate with us, and we're going to celebrate next on the Dattitude podcast.
If you're looking for the latest scoop and in-depth interviews on the Saints, the NFL, the Pelicans, LSU, along with the best bets of the week, then lucky you. Along with high-powered, in-the-know guests who cover our teams, Jim Derry brings plenty of Dattitude. And he'll always tell you the way it is, or at least the way he thinks it is.
Where you at, New Orleans? And hello to my friends elsewhere, everywhere, out there who are grabbing their hamstrings, wondering if they're next on the Saints injury list. I think you're okay. How about we just put you on the PUP list and you can sit back and listen to Dattitude, episode number 260, presented by Evangeline Securities for a Wednesday, July the 31st, 2024, the last show of July. You know what that means. Yes. August is next. You have all your months in order. You paid attention in school. Good job in second grade. I am so proud of you. I am your out of order host, Jim Derry. And whether you're watching on one of our NOLA.com social media channels or listening on demand to the podcast, as always, you know what I do. I thank you for being a part of the Dattitude family. You can be more than just a part of the Dattitude family. You can comment like our friends. Jerry's with us this morning. I know you're not the only one. Yes, Ross Jackson is coming up this morning. In complete transparency, as I say in a little bit, Ross is got a lot going on. He's doing 2 shows a day right now at training camp in Irvine. So we recorded the interview last night. Now, if you want to be a part of the show, while I'm on here live, you can type in a comment. I will show it live, whether you're watching on YouTube, Facebook. And if we ask, by the way, we've had a few new subscribers this week. We want it to ramp up. We want this thing to grow. It's doing great on Facebook, getting thousands and thousands of viewers every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday live on Facebook. But we would much rather you watch on YouTube because you can know when we go on the air live, and you can see you have all the access, free access to Gabe Henderson's great shorts that he puts together. I mean, it's mostly me talking or our guest talking, but Gabe puts them together. They're great. And you will have all the access to that. Click the little bell. You'll know when we go on the air live. Most of you know when we go on the air live anyway. And if you want to get in touch with me, type in your comment, or you can get in touch with me on X at Jim Derry Jr., as some people did the last couple of days, which I'm going to get to in a minute, or via email at jderry@theadvocate.com. We talked about Ross. Football returns Thursday night. No one is happier than Gabe Henderson. Houston Texans, Chicago Bears, Hall of Fame game. Do you get excited for this stuff? I don't. Look, I think I used to. Maybe it's because I'm older, because I used to be thrilled about the Hall of Fame game. Football's back, baby, and I'd watch every play, even though the last 2.5 quarters would be guys you never heard of before and probably will never hear of again. Most of them. It is football. I will have it on probably. I don't know how much I'll watch it. We'll see. I don't know what is in store for the rest of this show, except for the fact that we have 30 minutes of Ross Jackson talking about, again, the injuries piling up. How big of a deal is it? It's July. Oh, it's the last day of July. Maybe it's not that big of a deal. Maybe most of them aren't and some are. We'll get Ross's thoughts on that. But We'll talk about, obviously, again, the bright spots, the surprises of camp. I mean, everyone knows Mason Tipton is the next Hall of Fame receiver for the New Orleans Saints. I'm being facetious, but at the same time, I know we talk about stars of camp every time this year, this time every year. But there's something different about this guy. And again, I lean to the whole thing of the kickoff rules, the new kickoff rules. I don't think we can understand yet how big these new kickoff rules are going to be and how they're going to play a role. If you can play special teams and you can be a part of those new kickoff rules, you're probably going to find a place for yourself, not just this team, across the league, because none of the teams really know. So I think that's an interesting point that we get into, or at least think about. We'll be talking about that. And then I'm worried about how this show's going to go, though. I was coming back this morning from getting my morning coffee. I like to go out, clear my head in the morning. I get up, go drive off. I get my Racetrack coffee. Shout out to Racetrack. Maybe they should be a sponsor of this show. I don't know. But I go get my coffee, and on the way back, there was no way to avoid it. Oh, my God, the black cat crossed my path. I mean, I tried. Is there any way to go around? Not without driving up in someone's yard and going close to their door. I just got to suck it up and do it. I had to drive across the path of the black cat. Is it going to be bad luck for us this morning? I don't know. Is it going to be bad luck? There's a lot of hope for people out there. Brian says Charmin should be the new sponsor. Come on, man. Let's have fun. Maybe I'll work on it. I'll see what Charmin says. Dylan Smith, getting excited about this team. Good morning. Good morning to the Who Dat family, the Dattitude family. Let's go. Tim Boyle's Texans, Gabe Henderson says. Gabe's coming up in just a minute. Before we get to Gabe, I also wanted to bring up, I don't know how many of you are on X, pay attention to what's going on X, but I told you can find me at Jim Derry Jr. You can go find this long debate that I got into. This is why I always respond to people, but I usually, if it starts this long thread, sometimes I just respond and I'll let it go. You can have the last word, but I don't know why I found the need to get into this debate yesterday. Well, it was really started Monday afternoon. I responded to someone's tweet. I put myself right square in the middle of the whole Spencer Rattler love. There is so much. There are actually people, and there might be people watching the show, and I'm not trying to offend you. So don't get offended when I talk about this, because you're probably not going to like what I have to say. You've heard me say it before, most likely. There are so many people out there who truly believe that not only is Spencer Rattler the future of the New Orleans Saints. So, okay, you're entitled to your opinion. I'm not blasting you for it. I think you're wrong, but not blasting you for it. But there are people that not only think that Spencer Rattler is the future of this team, but that somehow he's going to overthrow and overtake Derek Carr before the end of the year. Why do people, and it's not as much about Spencer Rattler as it is about Derek Carr and how it got started on Twitter. Again, you can go through the threads. I might read a couple of them. I don't know. But I lost 8 followers over it. Not that that's that big of a deal when you have, I don't know, what do I have? 4,100, whatever it is. I don't care. I really don't care if I lose followers when people don't like what I say. I mean, I'm going to say what I say, and it's like this show. If you come into the show and you like what I say, most of the time, you're going to follow it and you're going to watch it. Jerry doesn't always agree. I love Jerry. Jerry's my, no offense to anybody else, but I think Jerry's my favorite fan because he's been following us and what we do here at NOLA.com for as long as I can remember. And there are a lot of other fans out there who have been watching since we started here on Dattitude in 2021, and especially since we rebranded, quote unquote, in March of this year. But I'm going to say what I say. We can disagree. It's okay. But people get so fired up. This is the topic of the year that are really firing up people because they hate Derek Carr. Why do you hate Derek Carr? Why are you going into a season? There are some people actively rooting against Derek Carr and Dennis Allen. And even if you dislike Derek Carr and Dennis Allen, it makes no sense whatsoever to root against them. If you want Spencer Rattler to be the quarterback, it means one thing. It means the Saints suck. If Spencer Rattler is the quarterback, if Jake Haener is the quarterback, if anyone other than Derek Carr is the quarterback for this team this year, I can't imagine anyone disagreeing with this. It means the Saints are terrible. Addison. That might be the first comment from Addison that we've ever had. Thank you. I don't care who the number two is. Whoever it is, just be dominant. Amen. It doesn't matter who the number two is. I mean, I'm not really rooting for anyone. I'm rooting for I'm not rooting for Spencer Rattler to fail. I'm not rooting for Jake Haener to win the spot. My point is, if either Jake Haener or Spencer Rattler have to play in 2024, it's a lost, messed up season. And that doesn't mean that 2025 is going to be any better. If Derek Carr stinks or the Saints stink and they're 2-7 and they make a change, or 2-9 and make a change, or Derek Carr gets hurt and have to make a change, it's not good for this football team. And above anything else, I mean, look, I try not to be a fan when I talk, but I basically speak from a fan's perspective, right? Even though I've been a sports writer for 33 years, or 34 years now, I guess, I'm human. I'm a lifelong New Orleanian. I've lived here my entire life, except for some time away in Baton Rouge, which is no different. And this is my home, and the Saints have been my team since I was growing up. I went through some really bad years, which we're going to talk about Aaron Brooks and the extra point. Not blaming Aaron Brooks, by the way. But I want this team to succeed. It is way more fun to come on a show 3 times a week and talk about a team that wins than talk about a team that stinks. But I just think it's funny that people attack. You say something they don't like, and that's the thing about social media now. They can just attack you. Well, guess what? I'm not a guy who's, again, I joke about being from the West Bank. I don't back off from attacks. It is what it is. Come at me. Come at me, bro. I don't know. 2-1 touchdown interception rate in college. I'm not going to get in. I did look up his college stats, and they're okay. But I thought he was a better runner in college than that's the gist you get, that he could be this next dynamic kind of quarterback. There are people literally comparing him to Patrick Mahomes and saying he'd be the next Patrick Mahomes. He was drafted in the 5th round. He was supposed to be a 2nd round pick. I was supposed to be the next Peter Finney. But here I am 34 years into my career. Here I am. I finally made it. You're finally watching me. You finally care what I have to say. Peter Finney didn't take him 34 years. Lots of things we're all supposed to be. But why do people get so pissed off when you say something they don't like? Why can't we just have a conversation and we get the name calling? When we get the name calling, I usually say what I have to say, and then I don't even go back and look at the responses. But some of them, they're interesting. Again, at Jim Derry Jr. on X, you can go look up. It's amazing. I'm not going to go through them. Then they were getting pissed off because they said Derek Carr, he's never going to win. I said he was the 12th rated quarterback last year. That's good enough. They didn't like that because they say stats don't mean anything. Then I brought up Drew Brees had 6 non-playoff seasons here. Oh, they really didn't like that. You don't talk bad about the Savior, El King. It's an interesting last couple days for sure. I ramble on. I guess we should move on with the show. But I just thought that was interesting, and I love the Twitter exchange. But let's have some kind of reasonable, intelligent conversation. Again, disagree with me all you want. I think it's great. I love it when you disagree with me here on the show. I love to show comments that disagree with me. You're right, Terrence. Where you been, by the way? I haven't talked to you in a while. Name calling is for the weak. I agree. But if you name call me, I might I'll try to be witty with my comeback, but it might involve some kind. Well, it wouldn't be name calling per se. Anyway, just go look at the thread. You can tell me what you think later on. All right, let's move on from X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, because we do have a good show. I was glad to have Ross on. He will definitely be on again. Absolutely. We were texting back and forth before and then after the show as well. Glad to have a new friend here on Dattitude. Has a lot to say, a lot of good stuff to say. And if you haven't checked out his podcast, I would imagine most of you that are watching have, because if you're like me, look, I listen to other people's podcasts. I'm not narrow-minded. It's what I do. A lot of time when I'm not sitting here in front of my computer, I'm listening to a Saints podcast that is someone else's. Saints Insider Show. I talk about it here on NOLA.com. Great show. Great stuff. They have, to me, the most behind-the-scenes information than anyone else. And I'm biased, and I get it, but they really do. I listen to New Orleans football. I'll listen to Ross Jackson, and I listen to others here and there. So I listen to them as many as I can. Some weeks I listen to more than others. I mean, it depends on how much driving I have to do, most likely, because I usually listen in the car. So it really kind of depends on how much driving. I do put it on. You know that one thing I love about podcasts, I don't know if you can do this on every podcast platform because I use Apple. You can put it on 1.5 times and listen to, an hour-long show and what is that, Gabe? 45 minutes? Yeah, that's what I thought. Say I'm mathematically uninclined. Good stuff, podcast. You listen to Dattitude. That's why you're here. Before we get to Gabe and Ross Jackson, let me continue my story about our friends at Evangeline Securities. I am talking to you if you're even pondering whether now is the time to sell your family-run or privately held business. I am talking to you if you are close to someone who is in this situation. What is the number one question you might have if this is you? It's, quote, what is my business worth? Unquote. Right? What is my business worth? You might not know. You might have an idea of what your business is worth. You might have Uncle Joe tell you hey man, that business is worth at least $300,000, and you find out it's worth way more than that. Or conversely, you may find out something, you may get the answer that, hey, maybe now's not the time to sell because it's not worth enough yet. You know who can help you answer these questions and help you figure out all these things? Evangeline Securities. It might be a decision y'all have been thinking about for quite some time. Now is the time to reach out to Evangeline's founding and managing partners, Nick Braden and Ron Hemo. They will schedule a complimentary valuation and maximize the value for your business. Oh, and by the way, I've told you this. You know this. Nick and Ron both grew up in New Orleans. They went off to fancy business schools that wouldn't even let me step foot on campus and eat popcorn. They then went to New York, the hustle and bustle of New York. But then they decided it was time to come back home. And they did that. And they have offices here on Poydras Street and in Lafayette to help the people they love most. More on this later in the show, but in the meantime, you can check them out at www, says Buddy D, .evangelinesecurities.com. All right, let's talk we got Wednesdays with Gabe, and we got a new thing going on here. There we go. Oh, there you go.
Got it.
I told you that Black Cat was going to screw something up. Gabe is coming on the show, and the new thing is now he would kind of like tell me what we're going to talk about in his few minutes here on the show, but I told him I don't want to know. I want it to be a surprise. See if that makes it more fun. It was fun already, but now we're going to make it more fun because I have no idea what you're either going to ask me or comment about this morning. Hit me with it.
So we've got two lists this morning. People love to post all-time lists or any list, top 10 list that gets interactions. It's cheap ways to get interactions. It gets people talking. So I've got two. One involves the Saints. So before we segue into the Saints, I'll go through the college one. ESPN recently put out a top 10 college football players since 2000s list.
I've seen
this. And I have a few issues with this. First off,
is Spencer Rattler on the list?
He is not.
Oh, okay.
He is not, nor is Caleb Williams,
all right,
who replaced him at Oklahoma. First off, I don't think Ndamukong Suh is the number one college football player since 2000. I think he deserves a place in the top 10, but I don't think he's number one. Ndamukong Suh was rated the number one player since 2000 in college.
Okay. Yeah, I can think of off the top of my head quite a few.
Let me actually have you guess this. Number 2 is a quarterback, Jim. Who do you think it is?
And this is since when? 2000?
Since 2000, best college quarterback.
Well, I'm biased, but I think the best. I think the best college quarterback since 2000 is Joe Burrow.
Joe Burrow is number 9 on the list.
I mean, he led the greatest team maybe in college football history with the greatest numbers, right? I mean,
yep. So
not all about numbers.
Some of the other quarterbacks featuring in the top 10. And all of these rightfully so. I think all of these guys deserve their place. Number 6 is Tim Tebow. Number 4 is Vince Young. Number 3 is Cam Newton. And at number 2, Baker Mayfield. The second best quarterback, or the second best player and best quarterback since 2000, according to ESPN. So that's a major problem I have.
I think he probably belongs in the top 100, but I certainly wouldn't put him over any of those guys you mentioned, except for Tim Tebow.
No, I think anyone who watched Tim Tebow should know that Tim Tebow. So when you're talking about college quarterbacks, my differentiator is I think there are great single season quarterbacks. I think if you're talking single season, Cam Newton and Joe Burrow are 1A, 1B. Doesn't matter how you split them. Greatest single season quarterbacks. I think over a career, Tim Tebow is the best college quarterback I've ever seen. Baker Mayfield was good, incredibly consistent. He's not better than any of those other guys.
I think Tim Tebow, I still think he was a bit overrated, in my opinion. Don't get me wrong. He was good. He belongs in the top 100, I think. But I don't think he was one of the top 10 quarterbacks.
His rushing ability was incredible.
Well, that's true.
So then, just so we don't.
But Ndamukong Suh isn't better than any of those guys, in my opinion.
So, well, then here's a few other issues I have. Reggie Bush is number 7. He's the only running back on this list. I don't think Reggie Bush is the best running back since 2000 in college. I think Darren McFadden got snubbed. I think Darren McFadden was better than Reggie Bush. He did it over 3 years. Yeah, but he played
for an average team. That doesn't help him. But
I get it, and he's a flashy name, and I understand that Reggie Bush split carries, which is what ends up hurting some of these guys.
And went to the national championship game.
Yeah, absolutely. Won the Heisman. So I think when it comes to guys like Adrian Peterson and Reggie Bush, I think they were incredible. I think they're some of the top 5 running backs. But I think Darren McFadden deserves a little more love on this list. And then lastly, the one wide receiver on this list is Larry Fitzgerald. And I have a problem with that solely because
I don't even remember Larry Fitzgerald that much in college, to be honest.
He had, I believe, he had 1,600 yards and 22 touchdowns in his last season
Stanford,
in college.
right?
Which is no, Pitt.
Okay, I don't know.
Which is incredible. That's an incredible season. But to me, Michael Crabtree is the best college receiver over a career since 2000. So that was just some of my thoughts on this list. I think they're not giving love to some of the guys who didn't win titles, who didn't have as much success, like Darren McFadden and Michael Crabtree. So just. Those are my thoughts on the top 10 college list. And then the one I really wanted to get your thoughts on, I don't know if you saw this, USA Today, specifically Touchdown Wire, which is a branch of USA Today, put out the top 10 worst coaches in the NFL list.
Okay.
I'll count it down from number 10. And let me just say, they did not give rookie head coaches a lot of love, which by default, they have to kind of fall under here. It feels harsh, but
I don't even think, if you're talking about top 10 worst coaches in the NFL or best coaches for that matter, I don't even think you could put rookie coaches in there because I don't think
you should be able to either, but I think if you're going to, by default, they have to fall in the bottom end, unless they've obviously coached.
Yeah, if they're going to another team, that's one. Yeah, if they're going to another team, I'm okay with it. But you can't talk about whatever. Okay.
So counting down from 10, number 10 is Mike McDonald of the Seahawks. Number 9, Dave Canales of the Panthers.
How do you know?
Number 8, Antonio Pierce. Number 7, Todd Bowles of the Buccaneers.
Okay, well, he should be way higher on that list. I think he's awful.
Number 6, Brian Callahan of the Titans, who I will go on record. As much as I don't like the Titans this year, I actually think that's a smart hire. Number 5, Robert Saleh of the Jets. Number 4, which I believe is the most harsh inclusion on this list. I think I've gone on record saying that I really like this coach, and I think he's been done dirty by his organization. Number 4, Giants, Brian Daboll.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
I think it is. He led Daniel Jones in that
That's absurd.
Terrible team.
Yeah, he's not in the top 10 worst coaches in the league.
Number 3, Gerard Mayo of the Patriots.
How do you know?
Number 2, Matt Eberflus of the Bears.
Yeah.
And I think you know where this is going. Number 1, Dennis Allen of the Saints.
Look, I've had my issues with DA, obviously. I still do. I think he has a chance. Look, again, I'm going to go into the season wishing him the best. And I hope Dennis Allen proves me wrong and proves a lot of other people wrong. That being said, everything that I've said that's negative about Dennis Allen over the course of the past 2 years, I think it's absurd to say he's the worst coach in the NFL.
Here's the thing about that is you also have to look at his Oakland tenure.
I
think he went 8-34 or 8 something like that.
Well, we going by numbers, then you can't even put. Then you certainly can't put rookies in there.
Yeah. I mean, it's
but
it's
you
an
can't. You
incredibly
shouldn't even
flawed
be
concept.
able to. Yeah, you shouldn't even be able to judge him on what he did in Oakland, in my opinion. I mean, the only thing that matters is when you talk about top 10 best or worst or anything, any list, top 10, it means right now. I mean, when we put up together a top 10 list for the 2024 season, I'm not just basing it off of what happened last year or 2 years ago or 8 years ago. I'm going about what now. And Dennis Allen, it's a fact. He went 9-8 last year. I mean, 7-10 the year before. Yeah, it's not good. Should he have gone better than 9-8? Absolutely. Should he have been better than 7-10 2 years ago? No doubt. But that doesn't mean he's the worst coach in the NFL. I mean, I would argue that. I mean, what has Raheem Morris done? I mean, the last chance he had to be a head coach, he wasn't very good. So why is he not in the top 10? I
think you slot him in over Brian Daboll. I don't think Brian Daboll should be anywhere near that top 10.
No, personally. And I will say this. I think that the NFC South as a whole, whether they're the worst division in football, I don't think they are, but I think they have the worst 4 coaches combined. If you put all 4 of those coaches together, I think they have the worst coaching set of coaches in the NFL, in my opinion. But we'll see. I don't think Dennis Allen's the worst coach in the NFL. And honestly, I don't even know if I would put him in the top 10. I'd have, again, it's not fair to put rookies in there, rookie head coaches in there, because I think if you take
rookies out, I think he's in the bottom 5.
Yeah, maybe.
I think so. I don't think I can come up with 5 coaches excluding rookies who are worse than Dennis Allen, personally.
You see how positive we're trying to keep it here. That's what we're doing here on the Dattitude podcast. I don't know what I would do with them, but I definitely don't think that Dennis Allen is the worst coach in the NFL, even though I know a lot of people disagree. Gabe, we'll have more to talk about. I love these lists, by the way, and can't wait to see what you got from me next week.
Yep, sounds good.
All right, Mondays with Gabe. Is that what we got? Mondays with Gabe, Wednesdays with Gabe. So we'll be back. Next time you come back, it'll be August, and your Texans will be 1-0 in the preseason.
Fingers crossed. Tim Boyle's Texans.
All right. See you later. Yep. Let's see. Mike says DA peaked at 9-8. Not going to get any better than that. We'll pick anywhere from 6 to 10 in the next draft. Look, I hear your prediction, and I don't I want to disagree with you, but I can't. I don't disagree with that. I'm going to say this, though. When it comes time to do my NFC South pick, and by the way, Jeff, hello. Thank you for joining the show. Season's open tonight. I think you mean Thursday. I think it starts Thursday, tomorrow night. But it is football season, regardless. Mike, I will say this, and I think the last 2 years I haven't used as much logic as I've needed to use, and I've used all head, all and half heart, and which is why I picked the over win total the last 2 years. This year, I'm picking all logic and no head/heart, because there is a huge part of me that is telling me that this team can be better than a lot of the fans and a lot of average Joes, I guess, think they're going to be. Now, I can tell you right now, the media is going to be, they're all going to pick the over 7.5. Not all of them, but almost all of them are going to pick over 7.5. It's going to be, 2 years ago, everyone, and when I say everyone, I mean everyone. I didn't hear a single soul say the Saints were not going to win more than 7 games in 2022. Not a single soul. And Vegas racked up. Last year, the over-under was 9.5. And I think all but a handful with that easy schedule. And it might have been 9. So there was probably a lot of pushes. But there were still a vast majority were picking over 9.5 because they had the easiest schedule in the NFL. And we all thought that the other 3 teams stunk. Well, this year, it's a little different. The media is still going to be a majority over. It's not going to be as much over, but there is so much. I talk about these podcasts I listen to. One thing I do say is they're like overly positive. Most of them. Not everybody. Not everybody's overly positive this year, but there's a lot of overly positive. Welcome, Rocky. You're late, but you're here, and that's all that matters. You get a check on the attendance mark. We don't have tardies here on Dattitude. You're good. So I'll say that. So I'm going to go into this year. My logic tells me the Saints will not be good. Okay. But my head and my heart, I'm not going to let it influence my pick this time. But that being said, they have talent. They certainly have talent. We're going to get into the injuries and what they mean in just less than a minute right here with Ross Jackson. But they have talent. They can win 10 games. They can go to the playoffs. I mean, I think realistically, anything other than just making the playoffs is probably unrealistic. But that being said, who knows? You get to the play. Look what Tampa Bay did last year. They came within a whisker of beating Detroit and making it to the NFC Championship game with a team that the Saints walloped in the second to last week when Tampa Bay needed to win the game. Now, they ended up winning the division anyway, but they needed to, at the time, they really needed to win that game. The Saints kept their hopes alive, and they beat the holy hell out of Tampa Bay and then beat the holy hell out of Atlanta the next week. So it depends on what Saints team we see. I am not as down as a lot of people are, but it's so funny with this team. There are hardly, outside of media members, there are a lot of media members picking them to be mediocre. And the last question that I asked Ross when you watch this interview is I asked him his prediction. And the way I framed it was I didn't want him to give me a record. I wanted him to give me a percentage on whether the Saints were going to make the playoffs or not. Was the percentage below 50%, right around 50%, or above 50%? I think his answer is pretty much what most of the media, are saying. We'll see if he's right. But I don't think, and I will tell you this, whether I agree with him or not, it's certainly not out of the question. Let's hear from Ross Jackson. Very cool interview. Had fun with it, and we'll be back when it's over. By the way, when I play this, if you're watching live, if you want to make a comment on anything he's saying, even though this is recorded, we can still show it here on the screen. Obviously, he's not going to answer your question, but if you have a comment on it, feel free to type it in. Ross Jackson, everybody. Here joining us in the Dattitude podcast on this Wednesday morning, although it is Tuesday when we record this to be as transparent as possible. Ross Jackson, the Locked On Saints podcast. Ross, a first-time guest here on the show. I'm so glad to have you.
Oh, I'm honored to be here, Jim. Thank you so much for having me on. Love all the work that y'all do, the great interviews, everything. I'm just glad to be here, glad to be a part of it. Thanks for having me on.
Tell us a little bit about what you do, and it's not just the podcast, but tell us a little bit about Locked On Saints before we get started here.
Yeah, absolutely. So Locked On Saints is a daily podcast, typically every Monday through Friday, but here during training camp, we tend to ramp up to basically 7 days a week, the whole way through training camp. In fact, right now we're doing 2 episodes a day, including a live episode covering the end of practice and then giving you some deeper thoughts for the next morning to get you ready for the next day of practice as well. So 5 days a week, Locked On Saints available, wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube, always free, always available.
I try to listen when I can. I'm not quite as busy as you, but it is definitely a busy time of the year for us. I don't know how you get any sleep.
Man, I have to make sure you just have to make it a point. You know what I mean? It's like work's going to pull from you what it needs. You've got to try to go 100 and everything else in terms of the personal decisions. So that's the only way that the sleep happens for me.
I remember when I was young, my friend. It seems like a long time ago. Let's get into these Saints and what's going on in training camp right now. And again, we're recording this on Tuesday evening in Tuesday training camp. The big news coming out of camp is Chris Olave and landed on his hip. We don't know how serious it is as we speak. When we record this podcast, we'll find out probably Wednesday afternoon a little bit more. But how concerning, first of all, is this to you?
I think the more concerning thing is just the number of injuries as a whole for this team so far. But when it comes to Chris Olave, I think the big thing right now is, what is the hip injury? Is it just a hip contusion or a bone bruise or something like that happened because he landed on his hip? Or are we looking at something more sort of detrimental, something more negative when it comes to all that? So the outlook is going to change based upon what the diagnosis ends up being. But it does give the Saints a little bit of an opportunity here to get a look at some of their other wideouts and everything behind Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, who are being asked to stand up or to stand out. But for me, I think the biggest concern is 6 days of practice. And I think there's been 8 injuries so far. There's been at least an injury every day. In the first 2 days, 2 injuries each. This to me is kind of the trend that you have to look at and say, okay, something's weird here. They're all bad luck injuries. It's guys landing on their hip. It's guys, having, an impact injury to their elbow, like Trajan Jeffcoat, for instance, where he ended up having to get carted off because of an elbow injury, which typically isn't a good sign, so on and so forth. So I think for me, that's kind of the biggest thing that maybe perks my eyebrows up a little bit is like, wow, like what is going on in terms of managing all these injuries and how are the Saints feeling about this? Because I imagine there has to be some balance of concern and frustration in some cases around all this, even though Dennis Allen told us he's not losing sleep over injuries like Marshon Lattimore. I wonder if you start to lose sleep over all of the injuries when you're having a new one every day.
We're going to get into that quote in just a minute and the overall picture of the injuries. But as far as Chris Olave goes, of all the injuries that have happened, you can talk about Kendre Miller. We're going to talk about Marshon Lattimore in just a minute.
Mm-hmm.
But, man, to me, this is one that, and again, he could be back at practice in a day or two. We don't know. And it is still early. It's late July. We're going into August tomorrow. But, to me, this is the one guy that the Saints just can't do without.
Yeah, he's one of the biggest parts, if not the biggest part of their offense. I know that this offense with Clint Kubiak, new offensive coordinator at the helm, wants to be predicated on its run game. But if you're going to score points, you're typically going to throw the football. And so you cannot afford to lose a guy like Chris Olave that's going to allow you to be able to do that. I got to say, I won't be surprised to see him on the field or off the field over the course of the next couple of days. The tricky part, or not the tricky part, but the nice thing for New Orleans actually is that Thursday is the day off for them. So they could do a little bit of a 2-for-1 here and then have him get 2 days of rest, but only miss one practice and then have him back out there ready to go on Friday. So that might be a way to manage this. We've seen the Saints for years now be very cautious with off-season, preseason training camp injuries. Maybe that's the line that they walk here. But at the same time, we watched Chris Olave suffer an ankle injury before a New England Patriots game, work out, and then play in that game. So I get the tough side of it. I get the I think Olave's got the toughness, but I also get the cautious sort of approach that the Saints have taken to these injuries as of late.
And all that makes sense, right? I mean, if you're going to be off on Thursday, I mean, really, it's better to be safe than sorry, especially with someone like that. The wide receiver depth, Ross, is concerning to me because, already you're talking about, who's going to make this team and who stood out. And we'll talk about surprises. And obviously Mason Tipton is part of the surprises. But when you look at this team as a whole, this is definitely not a position where you can afford, or obviously I don't think any position you can really afford to lose your number one, but
right.
This one in particular, because behind Shaheed, it's kind of, you got a bunch of guys vying for number 3 and number 4, and you really don't know who's going to be number 3 or number 4. And maybe you toss a lot of their names in a hat and come out with you can put them in any order you want.
Yeah, it's challenging right now because the expectation was that there would be a hard line drawn kind of between Olave, Shaheed, and second-year wide receiver A.T. Perry and the rest of the new guys, right? Those were the 3 guys that came over from the 2023 roster. Now it feels like that hard line is just between Olave, Shaheed, and then the rest of the guys. And A.T. Perry's kind of fallen into the rest of the guys, or into the field, if you will. And I think that is well below expectation in terms of what we thought we were going to see from A.T. Perry, especially with the strong close to the season that he had last year, catching all of his yards, all of his touchdowns, all of his receptions in those last 7 games, making some big plays for the Saints when they needed them the most. And so I'm a little bit concerned about this wide receiver depth as well. We just haven't really seen any wide receivers consistently stand out beyond Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, outside of the undrafted free agent rookie out of Yale, Mason Tipton. But you really don't want to be relying on an undrafted free agent rookie to help to push the top of your wide receiver group. I think that that's less than ideal, regardless of how well Mason Tipton proves he can perform over the course of this training camp.
I mean, if there is any good news as far as this goes, at least I think most people would say that all 3 quarterbacks so far have looked pretty good early in camp. You need that to be the case. Maybe we'll touch on that as we go along. But I want to move over to Marshon Lattimore and some of the other injuries here. Dattitude podcast of this Wednesday morning brought to you by Evangeline Securities. We're here with Ross Jackson of the Locked On Podcast, the Locked On Podcast Network. Ross, Lattimore to me was not just a concern injury-wise, but, how much is he invested in this team as a whole worries me as much because you're talking about a hip flexor injury. And look, if this guy doesn't think he's 100%, he's going to be the first one to tell you, look, I'm not ready to go on the field. This is the kind of injury to me that could linger longer than maybe Olave. I'm not as concerned about Olave again because it's July 31st, but Lattimore, I don't necessarily feel that way. This could be something that lingers.
Yeah, Dennis Allen, kind of alluded to the idea that he's going to miss a little bit of time here. I don't know that means going into the regular season or anything, but just in terms of these training camp practices. And look, what I will say when it comes to Marshon Lattimore's buy-in is that he has been out here doing everything 110%. He has been out there working all the other stuff. And so we've seen the buy-in from him since mandatory minicamp. The question is now what happens and how does that change when an injury is part of the conversation? So I understand your point there. And I think that the other thing to keep in mind here.
Yeah, real quick, Ross, I'm not questioning Marshon Lattimore himself. I'm just saying that when you're talking about where he is and the future, I mean, I don't think his future with this team is that long, whether it's the end of this year or whatever. I'm not questioning Marshon Lattimore and his work ethic because I think he works as hard as anyone. I'm just saying that, if you're wondering where this team is right now, maybe that does play a role in when you come back. So I just want to make clear about questioning him himself.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And look, I think that's a valid question. And I think the other piece of it too is what does he have to prove out here in training camp? And what does the organization need him to prove versus what does he think he has to prove? Because those two things could be disconnected, right? The organization could say, hey, we need to see you get out on the field as quickly as possible. But then Marshon Lattimore might look at himself as the top corner and say, what do you need me to prove out there, right? So this could go both ways, and it could be an interesting kind of dividing line in terms of expectation and reality for each side of this. So it's definitely something worth watching. But look, I think that the good news for New Orleans is that behind Lattimore, unlike at the wide receiver position, Paulson Adebo has been outstanding and stellar for them as their starting corner. Kool-Aid McKinstry, their rookie second-round pick out of Alabama, has looked fantastic so far here through camp. And then Alontae Taylor has continued to take on a bit of a mentorship role, a bit of a leadership role, coaching up some of the younger guys, and has continued to play in the slot where he's looking to take a step forward as well. So at least there's some depth at that position. And at least there's some value here in being able to get a look at some of these guys and in giving Marshon Lattimore that time to be able to go through what we're told is a rehab process that he's going through now so he can hopefully get back to the field sooner rather than later.
Yeah, Marshon Lattimore has already said that he's the number one quarterback in the NFL. And you know what? He's got a point. He very well could be. So I'm not saying he's not. You talked about it a couple of minutes ago and the fact that DA is talking about, quote unquote, not losing sleep over some of these injuries, but you talk about it when they compound. I mean, you brought up Kendre Miller. I mean, Jordan Mims could be great. James Robinson obviously has experience in the NFL and could step up if he can overcome that Achilles injury that he suffered a couple years ago. We just don't know. But when you're talking about a rookie who didn't get enough work in last year because he had injuries, they're just these injuries as a whole. And when it's this early in the season, when it's this early in the preseason, you're not even in August yet, and you got, I think you said the number is 9. I mean, that is super worrisome to me.
Yeah, I think it's right now what we've seen so far when it comes to the injuries here. It's just it's there's not a lot looking up in terms of where things are going there. Now, young guys like I want to highlight in particular Jordan Mims, who you mentioned, if I may. He has been. Yeah, he's been so much fun to watch out here. His footwork is outstanding. His vision is really good. His patience is all there. And it's interesting because the guy that we're talking about here in Kendre Miller, those were some of the things that you saw from him in that closing game up against the Atlanta Falcons in Week 18, where he rushed for over 70 yards and looked great. And then all of a sudden, everybody was going, oh, okay, I see it. But before that, he had missed a number of games with ankle sprains and hamstring injuries, and he had the MCL injury when he was coming in that kept him out of his draft process. And you could see some clear frustration from head coach Dennis Allen when talking about this, when he said, it's hard to make a team when you're always in the training room. And he even went a step further to talk about like him going through the rehab process and things like that, and a certain tone and all that. And so I think that's where there might be some frustration because they've seen a lot of injuries for this young guy. But to your point, they've seen a lot of injuries across the entire roster so far here throughout training camp. So it just kind of is what it is there. But I do think that there's enough here on the Saints running back room to challenge Kendre Miller, much like it feels like Dennis Allen publicly challenged Kendre Miller for a roster spot. So it would behoove him, I think, to get back out on the field as quickly as possible.
I thought the comment of camp so far was from DA when he said he's got to find a way to stay healthy. I don't know how you find a way to stay healthy, but that kind of suggests what you're talking about. Maybe there are things behind the scenes. I don't know what they would be, but pretty hard to find a way to keep yourself healthy. But that just goes to say, look, your spot as number 2 or number 3, whether it be Jamal Williams or whether it be Kendre Miller, it's not set in stone. So it just goes to say, look, dude, you're only a second-year player.
Yeah, he doesn't have that foothold, right? That stronghold to be able to kind of rest his laurels on anything. He's got to be out here and he's got to be able to prove something, and it's hard to do that. And then, the other thing for me too, Jim, on top of that was when he said, it's hard to make the team. Not it's hard to vie for snaps, it's hard to vie for position. It's hard to make the team. Like that was a straight up challenge about making the roster that I thought was loud and that I thought was something that I almost kind of celebrate Dennis Allen for challenging his players. We kind of heard that again going back to A.T. Perry on after Tuesday's practice when he said that A.T. Perry's been fine. And then somebody followed up and said, well, is fine good enough to make the roster? He said, well, I don't think fine's good enough in any profession and everything. So like there have been a lot of those public challenges of letting players know like, hey, we see you. And maybe there is some benefit to expressing that displeasure with how things have gone so far. We'll see if that ends up lighting the fire.
Yeah, when I'm asking my boss how I'm doing, I never want to hear you're doing fine.
That's right.
That's right. That's not really the answer you want to hear. And some of my listeners don't like it when I bring up the name Tajay Spears, but I'm just saying they could have had Tajay Spears in that spot, but that's neither here nor there. I'm biased because I covered him for 4 years in high school as well.
Sure.
All right. Are there any other injuries that stick out to you? Or, maybe it's just, it's early in camp, you get past this and you look back and you forget that these even happened.
Yeah, that's certainly the hope of the way that this all goes, by the way, is that, these are just some injuries that happen as players are adjusting and acclimating to getting ready for the beginning of camp. But I would say that the other one that is slightly concerning right now is Bryan Bresee. Now, he was back out on the field on Tuesday, watching off to the side. Always good to see the players at least around and on the field, even if they're not participating. And so we did see that from Bryan Bresee, but he's missed a couple of practices now with a foot injury. And he was pretty limited throughout the processes of mandatory mini camp, a little bit of OTAs, it felt like as well, not getting involved in as many snaps and stuff. And so I think now getting to this point where he's dealing with a foot injury, that's another one that you're looking at and going, okay, so how long has this been either ongoing throughout the offseason? Is this a new injury? Is it a different injury? There's just a lot of questions that come up with that. So he would be another one, big number 90, who they expect to have a big season after a pretty successful rookie season. They're expecting big things from him in terms of his ability to be able to contribute to this defensive line further. You want to see him get back out on the field as soon as possible.
What about Nick Saldiveri? And we've seen already kind of a mixing in with Logan Patrick playing at left guard. So we're not sure that, I think that the Saints would love for Nick Saldiveri to win that job, but he's certainly in a position. You want to talk about Kendre Miller, even more for Nick Saldiveri. He's got to be on the field to even have a chance to win that left guard spot.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Kendre Miller would be competing with a guy that came in as an undrafted free agent that was waived by one team and then signed by the Saints. Nick Saldiveri is battling with a veteran that has a lot of experience starting where he's competing to start, has a lot of experience at other spots on the interior of the offensive line. And I'll tell you this, too, Jim, brings a ton of energy to this New Orleans Saints offensive line. He's running up and down the field. He's getting to the second level, third level. He's giving a Ric Flair woos whenever there's big plays and all this other stuff. He just brings a big vocal, energetic presence to the offensive line that I'm not sure that we've seen maybe since Teron Armstead, just in terms of not in terms of talent, but just in terms of like the energy and the passion and the outward expression of it all that a guy like Lucas Patrick has brought. So I think the veteran experience,
I think I said logo on extra. I meant to say Lucas. Sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. And so seeing like that, seeing the energy that he brings, all that, I think all of that ends up working against Nick Saldiveri a little bit, who, is another guy that would like to get back out on the field, but has dealt with a fair share of injuries. He had a calf injury coming into the NFL as well when he was drafted out of Old Dominion. And so this is another potential either repeat or anything or something like that, of course causes some concern for you.
One thing you talk about Patrick and I think that's one thing that maybe this O-line really needs. I talked about the lack of maybe veteran leadership on this O-line. And now you bring in Fuanga, you're trying to rejuvenate Trevor Penning. Eric McCoy is still 25 years old, we forget, and Cesar Ruiz is young as well. So a guy like Patrick really could be a key influence for this team and could be huge.
Absolutely. Yeah. He could have a big time impact on what this offensive line does. He's seen a lot of it. He's seen a lot of what defenses do. He's operated in this kind of wide zone type system before. He's great in the run game, which is what this offense wants to be predicated on. So yeah, I agree. I think he brings a lot to this team in terms of what he could bring if he ends up being the one on the field.
And we haven't talked about it, but I also think that in some way, shape, or form, that Ali Udoh could also be a part because he's kind of a similar kind of thing going on. All right, let's move on to the positive. We've talked about the injuries. The positives there are a few surprises actually, and we kind of talked about a ton of them, but excuse me. I can't listen to a single show about the Saints or read a single story on NOLA.com or anywhere else that somewhere you don't find Mason Tipton's name in it. I mean, is he that good?
He's been really fun to watch out here. He's been dynamic. He's been explosive. I think the big question mark that's always going to linger around about him right now is he going to be the guy that is just the training camp standout, but then doesn't make the roster? We've seen this. I mean, gosh, we can go to the blast of the past for Adrian Arrington. We can take a look at a guy like Emmanuel Butler, all that. We've seen this before. And so the question is, what makes Mason Tipton different? And I will say he does contribute from a lot of different areas. I think that ends up having a positive impact for him. But despite all of that impact, and despite what it is that he's doing from the dynamic, explosive side, the biggest question mark is going to be what else can he bring to this team in order to make the roster?
You talk about I think you talked about it on your show about, we know he's got the IQ. He went to Yale. I mean, this is the question that he can pick up everything really quickly. And for someone like that, for someone his size and trying to make a roster, I mean, that could really play a huge role in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, he's and part of that IQ comes down to not just, knowing where to be and when, but also how to get there. He's a really crafty route runner. And that's something that Dennis Allen was sure to highlight about him when he came through. Dennis Allen also talked about how, look, Yale smart is different than football smart. All right. They're not necessarily the same thing, but certainly I think one of them scratches the other's back in some cases. And I think you can see that here with Mason Tipton. The big thing is going to be, can he contribute as a blocker in a system that wants its wide receivers to block? Is he going to be able to help contribute on special teams, which we know he can as a returner? Can he contribute as a coverage guy or as a gunner and things like that? I think those are going to be the other places to do it. But I think when it comes to the mental capacity for the game, when it comes to his ability as a route runner, not just the deep passes, but also attacking the middle of the field and the short and intermediate areas, these are all things that at least further the conversation for a guy like Mason Tipton, who right now deserves a lot of attention as we wait to see if he can string together greater consistency here throughout training camp.
I know this. He went to Yale. I'm from the West Bank. He's way smarter than I am. There's no question
Same.
about that. So, I'm not going to challenge him in an SAT contest because that ain't happening. And I do think it's interesting. He's wearing number 84. It's kind of like these days, when back, not even that long ago, all the receivers had to wear numbers in the 80s. And then they opened it up to where they could wear numbers in the teens or whatever. And he's wearing 84. He's wearing Eric Martin's old number. So he's that's the same as wearing like 72 in the major leagues. You didn't just wear that number. So we'll see if he makes it. I hope he does. He looks like a bright prospect, and we'll see what happens. You talked a little bit about Jordan Mims, but what do you love about him, and do you think he has a leg up on Robinson?
Yeah, I think his footwork is one of the big things that stands out to me. His vision, he's very comfortable being patient and kind of picking and choosing where things are going. But he's also a really good route runner, and maybe that's where a little bit of the separation is between him and James Robinson. I'll say, too, the other separation, not that James Robinson is not a hard worker. It's just that Jordan Mims, it's tough to outwork him. His work ethic is something that everyone talks about when it comes to him, something that Dennis Allen has been very excited about as well. So work ethic, dedication, all those things absolutely move the needle. And look, when you got to claw your way up, much like James Robinson did years ago, from being that undrafted free agent to trying to make a roster spot, you're really going to dig deep to get that done. And a guy like Jordan Mims has seen that with this New Orleans Saints roster over and over and over again, likely from afar. But look, Carl Granderson is on this roster right now as one of the as an extended player that just got a long-term deal, and he came as an undrafted free agent. And so he sees the examples of the team's willingness to commit to those guys that were undrafted for a long-term deal. So I think the drive is there. I think the work ethic is there. I think his ability on the field is there. The only big thing is going to be, can he consistently show up and make enough plays to say, hey, I could be the third or fourth running back on this roster. And look, helping out in special teams might help him be able to get that done as well.
From Irvine, California, this Wednesday morning, recording on Tuesday evening, the Dattitude podcast presented by Evangeline Securities is Ross Jackson of the Locked On Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Network. We've talked about the offense and the surprises. Is there anyone on defense that maybe has stood out that maybe we haven't talked about as much?
Well, maybe it's not as much of a surprise. Well, I guess it is a little bit of a surprise because we didn't even expect that he was going to be on the field just yet, Jim. But Chase Young has absolutely been a surprise and a bit of a revelation for this team. He right now has just gotten into the point where he is getting into team reps. This is the one and only guy that I've ever seen show up, and this was on Monday, shows up, takes 3 reps on team drills, and he's everyone's lead story. He's on every podcast. He's, everybody in the news media is talking about him. He's everybody's, big story on 3 snaps. And to me, that was pretty remarkable. And it was all deserved because he had 2 of those 3 pass rushing snaps were outstanding. He played the majority of first team snaps come Tuesday's practice. And again, proved to be disruptive, proved to be a guy that's going to be a bit of a hassle for offensive lines and a bit of a hassle for the offense. So I thought that he's been a good surprise in that not only has he gotten to the field more quickly than people might have initially expected, he's had an impact more than initially expected. And I think another guy that's been a bit of a surprise for us too, in a positive side, has been linebacker DeMarco Jackson. He's continued to make plays over on the defensive side, continue to make plays over on special teams. I don't think he's going to be in contention to leap anybody when it comes to linebackers, but that is a very crowded room right now. And there's only a couple of spots to fight for. And so he's given it his all to try to lock one of those up behind DeMario Davis, Pete Werner, and the new addition of Willie Gay, who's yet another one of those standouts as well.
Yep. Linebacker room looking pretty good right now.
Not bad. It was the one place that I thought that this team on the defensive side could take its biggest step forward. And so far it looks like they've done that. 3 words when you're talking about Chase Young. Poor Landon Young. That's all I can think about. I mean, he walked him back. You could come up with 3 more too and say poor Jesse Davis because he did the same thing to him too. But really, poor Jesse Davis. He shows up, gets out on the field for, I think it was his first practice.
Is it really fair to those guys?
No, right. He hasn't been at a training camp. He hasn't been at anything. He shows up and he's got Chase Young standing in front of him. Not the greatest straw to draw.
No, it's just Chase Young. All right, before we let you go, I do want to ask your opinion. We've talked to some other guests about the schedule. I haven't talked about it in over a week or so it's a good time to bring it up. And to me, the chances of this team having success this season, and when we talk about success, I'm not talking about another 9-8 season and finishing second.
Right.
I think you got to gauge success. If this team's going to be successful, it's got to be a 10-win season and really win the division, or a 10-win season and you get a wild card. That would also be considered a success, I believe, as well. So to do that, if you go through this first part of the schedule, and we talk about it so much, but I think a bare minimum is a 2-4 start. Okay, that's the bare minimum. Really, obviously, you'd rather be 3-3, because if you start 2-4, you got to finish the rest of the season 8-3, which is hard enough. It can be done, but just tell me your chances. And is this first part of the schedule, these first 6 games, as tough as I think they are?
Yeah, I think that's the toughest part of the schedule, if I'm being completely honest. I mean, there's the Dallas Cowboys, there's the Philadelphia Eagles, there's the Kansas City Chiefs early on in the schedule as well in week 5. And so for me, this is a big time prove it opportunity for the New Orleans Saints early on. But I look at it the same way. 2-4 is the absolute bottom level there that allows you to be able to take advantage of a weaker schedule in terms of opponents towards the back end of the year. But you've got to be able to start as strong as you can in the early goings. And if you can steal one from the Dallas Cowboys, the Philadelphia Eagles, or the Kansas City Chiefs, and win the games that you should win early on, then I think it puts you in an even better position. And remember, we've seen over and over again, one game in the first 5 weeks sometimes ends up being the nail in the coffin by season's end. We think about that Green Bay game all the time when we talk about what this New Orleans Saints season could have been in 2023, dropping that game early after going up 17-0. You can't suffer that again here in 2024, because then you've got to deal with more health questions toward the end of the season, all those other things. The schedule is going to get easier, but you want to make sure you've got at least 2 or 3 wins in your pocket through the first early goings of the schedule. I think that's absolutely right.
I mean, I guess the good news is I think it's going to take, forget about the overall record. I think you need to go bare minimum 4-2 in your division games, maybe 5-1. So if the Saints, and I think that's doable for this team. I'm not saying they're going to do it. I'm saying it's doable. So if you go 4-2, let's say 5-1. I mean, the good news is that 3 of your division games, 3 are in that first 6. So just win those 3 alone.
Yep, absolutely. And then if you think about it, you win 5 division games, you need 5 out of division games, and that feels attainable. Now, the thing for the New Orleans Saints that has to evolve for them from 2023 to 2024 is that in 2023, their wins came against the teams that they were better than. They struggled against the teams that were on the same level, and then their losses came against the teams that were better than them. They've got to steal one of those wins for the teams that are looked at as quote unquote better than them at some point throughout the season in order to be able to take themselves from that 9-8 to that 10-7 range.
All right, I'm not going to ask you for a prediction on a final record, but what I am going to ask you is if you had to put a percentage on their chances of making the playoffs this season, would you put it above 50% or below 50% or right at 50%?
I'd probably say slightly above 50%. I think the division is winnable, and they still have a weak schedule. As tough as the schedule is early, they are in a situation here to where they do have some things that can go their way. Atlanta improved on its offensive side, but they have not addressed their defense. Tampa's running it back to, try to kind of see what they can do with Baker Mayfield and these guys again. Does being a year longer in terms of their experience end up giving them, a better outlook, or does them being a year older end up giving them a worse outlook? So it all depends. I think really I look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as the one that kind of sets the tone for this NFC South. But I think that with everything around them and the Carolina Panthers kind of in the midst of this deep rebuild, I think that I would put them just above 50%, not too far, but just above 50% as a team that can make the playoffs. Weak division, weak schedule. There's some things that could go their way.
I love the optimism. And that is about 50%. That's optimistic. So I love the optimism. Ross Jackson, Locked On Saints podcast. You can get them twice a day right now. That is a lot of work, and we appreciate that you're doing it. Thanks, Ross, for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Jim. Always a pleasure. I really, really appreciate it. Look forward to talking to you again soon.
Oh, I remember the days when I was that young and just get up and go. Get like 4 hours of sleep, get up, do it all again. Find ways to have a few beers in there as well. If there's anything I miss about being young, it's that. I miss being able to eat whatever I want, however I want, whenever I want. I definitely can't do. There's lots of things I miss about being young, but I think that's number one. Being able to go, because the way it used to be, and for people that are younger than 40, you're laughing at me and telling me you're wrong. I'll be like that till the day I die. But, I used to be able to go and get like 3-4 hours of sleep, like 3-4 nights in a row. And then on the weekends or whatever days I was off, I just sleep like 14 hours and catch up. And I could sleep till noon. Or if I go to bed at 2, I could sleep till like 2 in the afternoon. There's lots of time. I spent a lot of time in my career on the copy desk when I didn't have to be at work till 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I could literally sleep till like 3:10, wake up, take a shower, eat something quick, and go to. Those days are gone. That's one thing about getting older that sucks. But I do love Ross's optimism and loved having him on the show because I agree with so much that he said, and it was a fun conversation. And again, I'm positive about that. I'm not all negative. I mean, people give me grief, and then some people actually tell me I'm too positive. But my heart and my head tells me this team can win. The more I look at the schedule, and one thing I talked about, and I don't think that I put enough credence in when we talk about these first 6 games, that 3 of the first 6 are against teams in their division. So that is most certainly a positive. It's most certainly a positive. Brian, last week, his point on Kendre Miller was comparing him to Antonio Pittman, 4th round. Yeah, you said Indiana when it was Ohio State. That's all right. Pierre Thomas, undrafted free agent. Miller's going to get cut or put on IR. Free agent running back's going to make the team. It's quite possible. It's definitely a scary situation. And if you're Kendre Miller, that's one thing. Another thing about being young is you just think everything's going to happen. Sometimes you think that. I don't think he realizes how much he needs to be on the field. I mean, it's one thing for your coach. Listen to your coach who's telling you, you need to find a way to not get injured. It's hard to do, I guess, if you're injury prone. And if you're getting injured over little things, maybe it's because you're not in the shape you should be. Maybe you didn't do enough in the offseason, or maybe you did, and that's just who you are. I don't like the list that we see. And you talk about this list, and we got it up on NOLA.com, and we have one thing I love that we do, lots of things I love that we do, but one thing that we do, and you can go through it, it only takes 3 or 4 minutes to read it, but your daily observations of what you saw in camp. And you can listen to the whole podcast, but you can go read our guys, and it only takes a few minutes. And on the injury front, talking about Chris Olave, but here's your injury list. Besides Olave and Lattimore, both hip injuries, Kendre Miller hamstring, Brian Bassett, like Ross said, how big is that? How big a deal is that? Nick Saldiveri. Look, Nick Saldiveri, if you're off the field for more than a couple days, Lucas Patrick's going to win that job. He might win it anyway. The offensive line has not been good so far. It's one thing we haven't talked about because I'm trying not to talk about the offensive line for 20 minutes every single day. We know they have problems, and they most certainly do. Got it. Nick Saldiveri's got to get out there. Trajan Jeffcoat. Justin Herron is now on injured reserve with a knee injury. Equinemius St. Brown had a hamstring injury. Fullback Xander Horvath missed Tuesday's practice for a personal matter. And then you also talk about what's in there and kind of reiterating what we're talking about. Trevor Penning, I don't want to keep blasting the dude, but he's not looking good. I heard on one of the podcasts, again, I'm not going to mention who it is. I listen to a lot of Saints podcasts, but one of the, what I would call uber positive podcasts. A podcast that I said, if I was the ultimate, maybe when I was younger and I saw all the roses and I went in every season thinking the Saints were going to have a winning record even when they stunk. This one particular podcast is this is the positive thing that they're talking about is Trevor Penning is he's been okay at times. You can't have a right tackle. Your best thing you can say about him is he's been okay at times. Hakeem. Miller's on thin ice. No doubt about it. If you ain't healthy, you ain't going to help. And with this team, that's one thing I can tell you right now. Dennis Allen's leash on some of these guys is thin and short. I don't think Kendre Miller will get cut, but they will find a way, if he's not going to contribute, to put him on IR and miss the first, 6 games you got to miss when you're on IR? 4 games. I forget. 6, I think. But whatever it is, Jordan Mims is right now got the leg up on that spot. But this offensive line It's going to be, I know you hate hearing about it every day, but it's going to be something we talk about every show until they prove that they're not awful. I mean, maybe they're not awful, but they ain't good. And so they gotta work on that. And if that means putting some of these veterans, remember I was saying Monday, and I said it last week, that one thing I liked was Dennis Allen was going to go with these 5 guys and maybe go all the way through at least the first preseason game. That's already changed. It's already changed. We've already seen before Nick Saldiveri got hurt, we saw Patrick in there at left guard. Lucas Patrick's going to probably win that job. He can play anywhere. It's kind of like James Hurst, right? And right tackle, put Landon Young in there. I mean, is Landon Young going to start at right tackle? Probably not. But I'll tell you, I wish they would go back to, and they may, moving Fawanga back to right tackle where he belongs. I'd rather see, I don't know, Landon Young or Ali Udo or what. I don't know how you do it. I don't know what you're going to do. I really don't. We can, and I know Rocky talks about the veteran thing, but I think if they haven't done it by now, they're not going to do a veteran. All right, we've been a little long today, so let's get on with the show. That was because of me and my ex rant from earlier. We made this show a little bit longer than it needs to be because I do want to get today's extra point is a fun one, and I know a few of you have been waiting, quite more than a few probably, been waiting to hear our extra point today on Aaron Brooks. So before we get to that, we told you earlier we would let you know more about how Evangeline Securities can help figure out what your family-run or privately held business might be worth, whether it's time to sell. We already guessed your biggest question of how much is my business worth, and that Evangeline will schedule a complimentary valuation of your company. Well, then, if you decide to proceed, completely up to you. Native New Orleanians Nick Braden, Ron Hemelt, and the folks at Evangeline will begin an extensive auction process among established private equity funds from around the world and maximize the return process for the founder of his or her family. I'm so excited about it. I'm verklempt. I got to drink a sip of water. It's exciting. Seriously. One thing I can promise you that they will do is they will not be like Kendre Miller, because you will run through the line completely unscathed, and you will not have one little scratch on your hammy if you go through Evangeline Securities, because they indeed are the top producer on their platform. There are so very few companies like them in this area, none with their dedication and success. They are fully licensed and ready to serve you. So get in touch with Nick and Ron about what's really important the rest of your life. And if you get a little verklempt like me, you go talk to Nick and Ron, they'll have water for you, ready for. They'll have coffee. Hell, they might even have some whiskey if you really need it. Whatever soothes your throat and calms your nerves, they've got it at Evangeline Securities. You can find them at www.evangelinesecurities.com. All right, here it is, boys and girls. Remember that they only wore that? I found that picture. They only wore that gold jersey once. I know a lot of people love it. I hate it. I hate that gold jersey, but I put it on there for a reason, because that game, that was the Vikings game of 2002. That was the beginning of the end, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, part positive, part whatever. Aaron Brooks. I still can't do it. Put a football in my hand. It still doesn't come out when I do that. No one did that like Aaron Brooks. But for today's extra point, the special anniversary in Saints history to share. That's right. We teased to it earlier, and we know some of you hung on for the last hour just to hear it. It was 24 years ago today, on July 31st, 2000, that brand new coach Jim Haslett and his friends in the front office traded linebacker KD Williams in a third-round selection in the 2001 NFL Draft to the Green Bay Packers for quarterback Aaron Brooks and tight end Lamont Hall. Now, first off, while hardly anyone remembers KD Williams, who would go on to start just 3 games for the Packers before his career ended, or Lamont Hall, who caught 16 passes for 94 yards and 2 touchdowns in 5 seasons with the Saints, it is notable that the third-round pick the Saints was traded again to the San Francisco 49ers, which selected fullback Heath Evans. Yes, that Heath Evans, who would go on to play 10 seasons in the NFL, including his final 2 with the Saints, one of which earned him a Super Bowl ring. And whether you loved Aaron Brooks or hated him, his career, in a way, sounds a lot like a current Saints quarterback. Who could that be? Unlike Derek Carr, though, Brooks came to New Orleans to be a backup to the newly signed Jeff Blake. But on a Sunday afternoon in the Superdome, ironically, against the Raiders, following a promising 7-3 start, Blake broke a foot and was lost for the season. In stepped Brooks, and Saints fans screamed in unison, "Oh, fiddlesticks!" Maybe that wasn't the F word they used, but fiddlesticks nonetheless works here on Dattitude. But Brooks was not only good enough to fill in, he was good enough to become the Saints' future. He would go 3-2 down the stretch, including a win on the road in St. Louis in his first start against the greatest show on turf. And he ran in the game-winning touchdown with less than 4 minutes remaining. 5 weeks later, with a little help from the football gods and Hakeem dropped the ball! Hakeem dropped the ball! Brooks would lead the Saints past the Rams for their first ever playoff victory in their 34th season of existence. What was to come was nothing short of a mixed bag. Blake was healthy enough to return in 2001, but Hazlitt went with Brooks, and the Saints finished 7-9. In 2002, many screamed for the Lafayette boy, Jake Delhomme, to take over. But again, Brooks won out, and that might have been the beginning of the long end to Hazlitt's tenure in New Orleans. The Saints jumped out to a 6-1 start that 2002 season when they defeated the 49ers and were quite possibly the best team in the league at the midway point. But even though they went 3-3 over the next 6 games, they needed just one win in their final 3, all against losing teams to make the playoffs. Brooks, Hazlitt, and the Saints failed miserably, including a loss to the Cincinnati Bengals, who won just 2 games all season, one of them being in the penultimate game of 2002 against the Saints. Delhomme then left with Carolina and led the Panthers to the Super Bowl in his 3rd season there. Well, the Saints went 8-8 in 2003 and 2004, and we all know 3-13 in the Katrina disaster of 2005. In 2006, Brooks became, you guessed it, a member of the Raiders. In 2007, he was out of the league. Again, there are many mixed feelings about Aaron Brooks. On one hand, he led the Saints to the first playoff victory, and it's tough to put in context how big a deal that was for a franchise who mired and wallowed in pathetic at its worst and mediocre for much of its best through the first 3.5 decades of its existence. On the other hand, he was an icon through his first Final 4 seasons here of what the New Orleans Saints were. A walking sign that read, "Wait till next year." But if there were a third hand, it would be the best hand of all. Because without Aaron Brooks in black and gold, there may have never been Drew Brees in black and gold. So one might say, without July 31st, 2000, there might have never been February 7th, 2010. Well, that is going to wrap it up here on this Wednesday, and I'm glad all of you that stuck to the whole thing. Jerry remembers. How can you not? I mean, seriously. If you were around then, you know what I'm talking about. How can you not remember? It's hard to forget sometimes. What you will not forget is that we're coming back on Friday. But first, I want to thank today's guest, Ross Jackson, and of course, as always, big props to Gabe Henderson. Mondays and Wednesdays with Gabe, and he's going to shoot me something new that I don't even know what he's going to, it's just going to hit me by surprise. Had a couple good lists this morning. We hope you can join us, as we told you, next on Wednesday. You know what's coming. Larry Holder, our friend of The Athletic. We're going to preview the AFC North. We're also going to give you camp updates too, so don't worry. There'll be plenty of Saints content. AFC North, quite possibly the most interesting division in football, and I can't wait to see how close or different our predictions are. I might have a surprise for you. I don't know. Maybe it's not a surprise. I don't know. Just saying. A reminder to subscribe to our Dattitude YouTube page. Click the little bell and to receive notifications when we go on the air. And don't forget, you also have access to all of the great shorts that we put together. I think it's 2 a day during the week and 1 each day on the weekend. Gabe doing a phenomenal job, and they're getting watched. You can be a part of that. You can also find us wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Spotify, and many more. And you can find a replay of the show on NOLA YouTube.com/sports. We will see you Friday. Stay cool, drink lots of liquids, and watch some of the YouTube shorts. And maybe watch a little football tomorrow night. Live football tomorrow night. What will we have to talk about Friday? Come back and see. Take it easy, my friends.
If you're looking for the latest scoop and in-depth interviews on the Saints, the NFL, the Pelicans, LSU, along with the best bets of the week, then lucky you. Along with high-powered, in-the-know guests who cover our teams, Jim Derry brings plenty of Dattitude. And he'll always tell you the way it is, or at least the way he thinks it is.